Hey, what is up YouTube? Adam back here, and today I have episode 3 of Making, and today I'm going to be making Yoda as seen in his Clone Wars outfit. So this figure is a bit of a stand-in. I meant to make Commander Doom this week, however, just mainly some shipping complications have delayed that, so I figured why not just make this since I'm already making Jack, Thire, and Rys from the first episode of the Clone Wars, so I figured why not make Yoda from the same episode and just have the whole gang basically. So yeah, that's why I'm just deciding to do this episode instead of the Commander Doom, but I will still be doing the Commander Doom. I'll be making him hopefully next week. So yeah, so sorry to the people that suggested him. I will be sure to still give you shout outs. So yeah, thank you for that. Anyways, here is the base parts that I'm going to be using for him. I figured the Clone Wars head would be perfect, just mainly for the style that I'm going for, mainly being the Clone Wars animation style. So I figured this would just be fine to sort of paint over and basically sort of redo the whole coloring, because as much as I like this mold, it's sort of just, well, first of all, it's a little big, but the head mainly and the color, I mean, even the eyes are the wrong color. They're green and not the sort of hazel color he has. But yeah, other than that, I'm gonna have to repaint the base color and the ears and the hair, add accents, so should be pretty interesting. And yeah, basically other than that, it's just a red torso, white hands, and dark brown short legs. Yeah, I pretty much didn't want to go with the Harry Potter medium legs that are actually movable, just because, he's already pretty oversized compared to the clones, so I wanted him to be as short as possible. But yeah, I haven't really made too many Jedis, so I think the last two I made were Anakin and Obi-Wan from the season 7 of the Clone Wars, which was like almost a year ago, I think. But other than that, I've really just had a lot of failed attempts at making them, so this will be interesting. I'm going to see if I can pull it off, so hopefully it goes well. But without further ado, let's get right into making this figure. Alright, so to start off, I first took the figure apart, the base parts mainly, just to carve out the armholes using a Citadel mold maker, which helps get rid of the friction when the arms swivel, and it keeps the paint from coming off. So yeah, and then I added the brick red paint color from Apple Barrel, which I thought would work best with a white, and then combine those to represent Yoda's sort of undershirt under his tan robes. And this was one of 2 base colors that I was going to use, and I used a paintbrush to apply this to the red torso. And I mainly painted it everywhere just because it works best just to cover the entire torso with the undershirt, because you never know what's going to show through, and it really is sort of annoying when glaring details are sort of lost and like the red is showing through. So yeah, I painted the front, sides, back, and top of the torso, only leaving the red neck holder, I guess you could say, at the top in the original red color. Alright, so next I took a Mornfang brown Citadel color and I put it in my little paint palette container, and this was to use it later potentially, and I added some white to it and mixed it around. And I used this to sort of separate the upper and lower part of the undershirt, since they are 2 different colors after all. And so this was to be more of a brown color instead of the dark red that was on the lower half. So I think it turned out pretty well. And then I used that same color for the arms, and I painted both the arms just full wrap almost all the way around, except for the pin connectors that you wouldn't be able to see since they connect to the arm. I then added a black line to separate the lower and upper undershirt. So this was to essentially just add another layer of detail. I then went over the brown again in the same color just to make it a more solidified color, just because that is necessary, not necessarily with darker colors, but lighter colors especially. And I needed to thin out the black line as well, since I mainly was focused on keeping it straight. I then added the upper shirt details, including his little black details near the top of the neck, and another black line that needed another layer of paint due to just the general nature of small lines needing a couple layers just to turn out straight. And I went over the dark red paint again. And then you can see I went over the brown paint again. And then finally, once I put the legs on, you can see the torso is finally starting to come together, and just outside of a few corners that needed to be touched up. For the pants, I used the same brown I used as on the upper shirt, and this was a full wrap, leaving room for the green that would later be on the feet. I then started creating the trench coat, or the robes, or however you want to say it, that Yoda wears. And to do this, I laid out some Procreate and I flattened it, and then I started cutting out the shape, starting off with a cut on the top that wasn't quite straight enough the first time, so I went back and made a second cut that proved to be straighter than the first. I then laid down a trench coat from Cape Madness, using it to measure the distance that would be needed for the armholes, since that would be a pretty important detail, considering you can't really go back with Procreate without really destroying such a thin piece. So it took some going back and forth, but I finally eventually got it after trying to cut out the circles for the arms. I then placed the figure to exactly measure where the length would need to be, and I used mainly just reference to figure out that it doesn't quite go past the toes, so it needs to be sort of right where the bottom of the legs are. I then shaped the sides, mainly making them sort of curved towards the top, and then sort of more straight near the bottom. Then I sort of just demonstrated the wrap that I would use, as you can see right there. Next, I mixed a palm leaf apple barrel color, and I sort of failed on this one. I added black, and to fix this, I instead needed to add some blue and mix that around, and then I added a lot of yellow. And I say a lot because this is not it. I added more once I went back to it. And to paint the head, and to get the skin tone right, it just needs a lot of yellow, just because the paint always looks darker once it's applied than actually what it looks like in the container, and you'll see what I mean. But I pretty much just painted everything around the eyes, and made sure not to touch the eyes because I do need those. I do not have the intention of repainting those, and I did not touch the hair, so not yet at least. So there is the palm leaf color that I was talking about, and so this color I then used a black that I sort of almost that I failed with earlier. I used that same color to actually do the accents instead, which I think worked really well, and with Lego's already molded head it worked even better, just because the paint felt so much easier. It was just falling into place on the head, so that was a really simple process. And I then added the highlights to the ears, as you can see, and pretty much just a bunch of lines. And I did get rid of those on the cheeks, the dark green on the cheeks later, just because it didn't quite look right, and you'll see that I fixed that in a second. But as you can see, even the lines around the eyebrows and the other lines on the back sort of need some touching up, because it wasn't perfect the first time. But the good thing about this paint was that I watered it down pretty substantially, so it worked where I could go over it over and over again. I then added the black for the mouth as well. Next, I painted the color for the feet, and this was a wraparound paint job as well. I then used the dark granite color mainly to combine with the white, and then mix that around, and it required some lightening, but this was mainly just, I needed the lightest possible color for Yoda's hair, just because it is really, it's almost a white color, basically, is what I should say. But yeah, so I basically just covered his hair in this really light gray, and you'll see I even went a little bit over the ears, because it does actually go over the ears in some of the references that I found. I then used that same light gray color to paint the toes on Yoda's feet, and I was originally going to sculpt them, but I figured with the robes that I made that it wouldn't be the best idea, just because they might interfere with the robes, and I would later turn out to be pretty correct about that, just because really fragile pieces, and I did not want to mess with them. So I then added the dark green highlights around the toes, just to give them more of a three-dimensional feel. And then I got out the Procreate again, and this was to mainly fix some of the issues with the trench coat, or the robes. I don't know why I keep saying trench coat. The robes had some issues because they were being bent, and they were so thin that they had some trouble. Some spots would not particularly stay together, so I had to go over some of the areas again with another layer and just sort of thin that out, which you can see I was doing with my X-Acto knife right there. And then I added some strands of Procreate to create the hood, essentially, and the outer details on the edges of the coat. And then I did more Procreate work with the arms, mainly being just adding the sort of robes, I guess, on the arms, just by adding another layer of Procreate and thinning it out towards the top. And this was just to give it more of a like buff look, just to make it look like there are actually robes there. And sort of towards the bottom of near the hand, you can see that they sort of rolled them up to make them look like sleeves, but I sanded them down then with some sandpaper. Next, I super glued the trench coats, or the robes, onto Yoda, and I started off by aligning one side with its armhole, and then I super glued the back, and this did need super glue. There was no way that the robes are going to stay in place without it, so it's unfortunate, but yeah, it's just something that could not be avoided in this case. And I do think that the robes being made out of Procreate really made it a lot better than just electrical tape or anything else I could have used. But once I got it wrapped, I was pretty happy with the look overall, and one side was a little bit lower than the other, but I think that really gave it like a nice natural look, like something that would actually happen. And then once with the added arms, it was just amazing. I then used a khaki apple barrel color to paint the robes in. And this paint was a little bit hard to work with, I will admit. It did take 2 coats on the robes, and just because I guess gray, I mean, anytime you paint on a dark color, with a lighter color, it takes usually 1 or 2 layers of paints. But I think they turned out pretty well. It did take a lot of paint too. I was trying to be careful not to over apply, but it was sort of very tedious, so it was a little bit hard not to be a little impatient wanting to get this figure done. But once the robes were painted up, I then added the paint to the arms. The arms were a lot quicker. I then painted the hands, which I painted in a green color, the same green that I used as the base color for Yoda's head, and painted the insides of them, and these would later be sealed just to protect them from any accessories I gave them. And then I used that same Mornfang brown color, and I put it in my palette, and I used some white color, or some white paint, the same matte finish, and I mixed those around. And I needed a lot of white paint in this case just because I was going to paint his eyes, and his eyes are very, very light brown, so I needed a lighter color than I was used to, and I just used a push pin and my X-Acto knife to very carefully place the color of his eyes over the pre-existing sand green pupils, which for some reason, I don't know why LEGO gave him those color eyes, since he does not have sand green eyes. But I was very happy with the finished product, and I painted even the claws on the hands later as well. And I think the color turned out great. You guys can leave your feedback down below if there's any improvements I should make. But I gave him a reddish brown 3L cane, I guess, walking stick, whatever he has, to go with the figure. But yeah, that is pretty much it. Let me know if you guys like these edits, and I will put together some more episodes of making like this. And yeah, that is pretty much it. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more. And this is goodbye, and have a nice day.